Welcome on the cosmic atom. Never engage in a spiritual battle with someone who has already received divine support, especially if you don't know their ranking. Let me state this out front. Some individuals are unaware that they are swinging at a spiritual general until their whole existence begins to unravel. And by then, it's too late, since heaven's tribunal has already rendered its decision. You claim you did not retaliate, but the realms did. This is a disturbing reality. In ancient spiritual traditions spanning nations, from Tibet to indigenous tribes, the most powerful spiritual entities were often disguised as the most ordinary. Why? So that the proud would reveal themselves through hubris, while the selected would advance unhindered. However, history constantly repeats itself, particularly when someone attempts to play God with a person chosen by God himself. This is precisely what happened to you. They assumed you were simply a nice, quiet person, perhaps even naive. Strange to get to spiritual. You know, the typical shade people cast when they can't understand you. What? They didn't realize you were spiritually encrypted, and every time they derided, mistreated, or conspired against you, they accidentally activated a holy firewall. The sort that doesn't just protect you, it penalizes them. And let's be honest, isn't it interesting how the people who yelled, "You aren't that deep," are you experiencing nightmares about yourself? Nightmares after crossing you, as well as adverse effect from just being in your aura for an extended period of time. That's not a coincidence. That is a consequence. So brace up, because this isn't your typical spiritual motivational message. This is a court case. This is heavenly exposure. And we're going to find out why they had no clue who they were playing with until they touched something that was never theirs in test number 1. They confuse humility with weakness until they challenge the authorities. You don't have to admit they believed you were weak because you didn't react as anticipated. You did not clap back. You did not expose them. You did not descend to their level. And in their minds, it signified you lacked power. But they couldn't see or were ignorant to the fact that your quiet was never an indication of defeat. It was about discipline. You were not silent because you were unable to talk. You were silent because you didn't have to. Your very presence said volumes. And they lacked this spiritual intelligence to hear it. They mistook humility for weakness. They assumed you couldn't land a punch since you didn't boast. You must have little to say. However, this is what occurs when individuals act from their egos. They presume that anybody who is not loud is losing. But you weren't looking to win a little war. You held rank in a conflict that they couldn't see. What they overlooked was the true power. It does not make an announcement. It does not need validation. It doesn't need to prove anything. You did not have to show your anointing, since your life speaks for itself. You didn't need to show off your strength, since your survival already did. The fact that you did not respond as they desired was your response. That was a warning shot. And when they rejected the warning and continued to push, test, and provoke, they found out. That's when odd things began to happen. Things they were unable to explain. People began to back away from them. Their scheme failed. Peace vanished from their lives. They began to dream that you were plagued by what they'd done. And then it struck them. You were not someone they should have messed with. You weren't just another individual. You were protected, covered, and shipped. They anticipated a battle. However, they received a spiritual warning that certain individuals travel with invisible armies. That was what rocked them to their core. Not your words, but your status. You didn't act out because you didn't have to. You knew who you were. They now do too. However, it took their breaking that heavenly limit to comprehend. The most dangerous ones are usually the quietest. They're not terrified. They're being backed up. Second, they were unaware that they were starting a conflict with a world rather than a person. They assumed they were coming for you. Only one individual. They didn't comprehend that when they challenged you, they were confronting the whole spiritual sphere which was supporting you. They weren't simply casting shadow, talking, or conspiring behind your back. They were unintentionally signing a spiritual declaration of war against something much greater than they could comprehend. Because you're more than simply a lovely guy with excellent values. You're carrying heavenly instructions. You haven't merely loved your commission. That is, whatever attempts to resist you is not simply opposing a human person. It goes against the basic plan that God created and sent into the earth. This is why people are incorrect. You don't get away with it for long. Things start going apart for them, and they have no idea why. Their relationships deteriorate, their prospects dry up, and they begin to feel spiritually depleted. It is not karma. It is a response from the domain they have offended. Spiritual warfare isn't always loud. Sometimes it is subtle. It's an invisible reprisal, not vengeance. Correction. They thought they were just playing petty games, but heaven took it personally because of who you are. You aren't simply another face in the throng. You're an assignment. You're a vessel. And when they attempted to undermine, defame, or exploit you, they unintentionally touched something precious. That is not acceptable under spiritual law. There are repercussions for tampering with someone who is protected. They assumed it was a game, but they had no idea how much it cost. They had no idea that while they were behaving out of ego, you were walking with genuine God-given power that does not need screams or lightning bolts to make its message. It simply is. And as the weight of their actions finally crashed down, they understood they weren't battling a person. They were battling against a power, a whole realm, and you were only acting as its spokesman. So no, you did not curse them. You did not retaliate. You didn't move a finger. But heaven did. Because when someone attempts to undermine a divine assignment, they aren't testing you. It's the one who sent you. And the exam always ends with judgment. Number 3, your spirit has clearance. They'll never earn it. And this is what scares them today. Certain items you carry cannot be replicated, falsified, or completely explained. One of these things is your spiritual cleansing. It is not something you can purchase, study for, or get via flattery and performance. It's something God inscribed in your spirit before you were born. The fact is that those who tested you were not prepared for the kind of access you now have. They saw the surface, your compassion, humility, stillness, and belief that this was all there was to you. They had no idea there were regions inside you. They have no right attempting to reach your spiritual position. It is not about being superior to others. It is all about being allowed. You've gone through experiences that qualify you for access that most people will never have. That's why when they attempted to enter your space via manipulation, envy, or control, things went poorly for them. It wasn't like you did anything to them. They trespassed into sealed area. And, spiritually speaking, unlawful access always has repercussions. What truly bothers them now is how you stayed through all. You did not explain yourself. You did not respond in the manner they expected. That calm, constant presence, that was your authority manifested. And now it haunts them because they realize they were in over their heads. They messed with someone who does more than merely pray. They command someone who does not just talk. They alter atmospheres. They had no idea what degree of spiritual access you have until their life began to reveal signals that they had passed a boundary. They attempted to figure you out using superficial reasoning, but what you carry is illogical. It is spiritual, and now they understand. They've seen how doors open for you, but remain closed for others, and how things fall into place for you after storms that would have wrecked most people. How your name carries weight in places you've never entered. That is not luck. That is clearance. The same people who sought to test you are now testing themselves. Because when you have divine access, you are not just going through life. You are enforcing something larger than yourself. And those who underestimated you, they're just now understanding they were never even clear to say your name. Number 4, they insulted the vessel because they were unable to distinguish the spirit status. They made their judgments based on your external circumstances. They assessed you by what you wore, the way you talked, where did you come from, what you have earned. Who you identified with in their minds informed them of all they needed to know. They thought they had you figured out. They assumed you were common. They assumed you were simple to categorize and reject. What they didn't know was that they were measuring something eternal with temporal instruments. And that is always a mistake. They were so focused on your past that they entirely overlooked your mission. They were examining your appearance while neglecting your essence. And in doing so, they missed the most deadly aspect of you, the one they couldn't see. Because the reality is, you did not appear in their life to amuse, fit in, or impress anybody. You arrived as a walking disturbance to anything phony, weak, gloomy, or twisted. You were tasked with breaking habits, uprooting illusions, and challenging the fundamental foundations on which their egos were constructed. But they couldn't see it because they were so preoccupied with looks. They insulted the vessel because it did not fit their definition of power. They anticipated the selected individual to seem polished, powerful, affluent, loud, or devout. But you came up completely authentically, which challenged their fake spirituality. So they attempted to discredit you. They attempted to clown you. They looked down on you because they couldn't see up into the spirit world to acknowledge your position. What's crazy is that the indications they derided are now the ones they dread. They made fun of your essay, but now they are unable to sleep. They minimized your voyage, but now they are covertly studying you. You didn't alter anything. You just kept in your lane. Your mission eventually presented itself. You didn't have to say anything. Your fruit revealed the difference. You were not showy. You were operating. That's what started things in motion. They were unable to determine your rank because they had never educated their spirit to perceive. And it's costing them more than they ever expected. Number 5, they had no idea that heaven recognized you. However, hell now exists as well. For a long time, you moved silently. You remained beneath the radar. You were not showy. You were not loud. You didn't strive to establish a name for yourself. You were only doing your part, healing, maturing, obeying, and being in sync, even when no one was looking. Because of this, most people believed you were just ordinary. They didn't realize that your secret years were not lost time. These were heavenly preparations. I knew you were long before everyone else did. But they tested you, and they attempted to condemn what God had already blessed. That's when everything changed. When they came after you with ill intentions, they unwittingly triggered the full awareness of the spirit world. What was once hushed has become loud. What was previously concealed became evident. And as they continued to gaze at you as if you were little and controllable, the domain of darkness began to shudder in recognition of your mission. Your test triggered your revealing. You fought back with your perseverance, not your words. Your determination to give up and your spiritual standing spoke more than anything they ever said about you. The kingdom of evil now knows your name. Demons that used to murmur and circle from a distance now disperse as you approach a room. Previously, you were just a danger in principle. You are now a verifiable spiritual threat. Why? Because you did not break. You did not get lost in the pandemonium they generated. You remained rooted. In doing so, you displayed what you actually possess. They had no idea that injuring you would draw attention to your covering, but it did. Heaven has already designated you as chosen. Hell now knows it as well. That is why the assaults have become bolder, but also more desperate. That is why the battle seems more fierce. It is because you're no longer a quiet menace. You have been activated. You've turned out to be exactly what they feared. They attempted to test you as if you were average. They're now coping with the fact that your name appears in both universes. And no one views you in the same way anymore. One rejoices while the other trembles. Sixth, their strikes were really examinations, and you walked by them without realizing it. They believed they were destroying you. Every time they lied about your identity, attempted to embarrass you, or set you up for failure, they believed they were winning. They felt they were diminishing your spirit, pushing you into a corner, and undermining your confidence. However, they were unaware that they had no power over your result. What they intended to hurt heaven has already been repurposed. Every strike they launched was a hidden test, and you passed them all without even knowing it. The betrayal was a test of your commitment to your own spirit. The rejection that determined if you had abandoned your course to seek acceptance. The backstabbing, a test of your capacity to maintain purity even while bleeding. What they believed was breaking you was really developing you as they tried to damage your reputation. They were essentially verifying your character in front of the spiritual world. You were not being destroyed. You were being unveiled. Their acts did not reveal your flaws. They displayed your power not just to them, but to heaven, hell, and every dimension that saw your adventure. What they did demonstrated something. They refused to recognize that even when they gave you their worst, you did not give up, retaliate, or become like them. You consistently outperformed expectations, not because it didn't hurt, but because your integrity would not allow you to fall to their level. That is not weakness. That is spiritual maturity. They felt they had power over your tail, yet they were unintentionally contributing to your elevation. Every act of cruelty they committed was a gateway you went through. Every trap they placed became a platform for your resistance. And while they were celebrating your supposed collapse, heaven was discreetly promoting you. You weren't even aware you were being tested. Nonetheless, you passed with distinction. That is what bothers them today. The version of you they attempted to shatter simply revealed a version of you that they were unprepared to witness. Not shattered or bitter, but born anew by fire. Number 7, they underestimated you because their spirits were inexperienced. They did not misjudge you because they were ignorant. In reality, many of them are clever by global standards, educated, eloquent, and socially aware. However, intellect does not equal spiritual sight. What they lacked was not intelligence. It was an initiation. They had never gone to the lengths necessary to discern someone who had been spiritually molded. So, when they met you, they couldn't understand you. And what the ego cannot fathom, it attempts to control or destroy. You made them uneasy, and they didn't understand why. You were not aggressive or belligerent, but something about you disturbed their comfort zone. That something was your anointing, your presence, convicting whatever was still hidden inside them. Not because you condemned them, but because you chose not to join them. And it alone revealed what they believed they had hidden. You didn't need to preach. You didn't need to warn them. Your energy caused their devils to itch. That's why their initial reaction was to push back. People who are not spiritually initiated can only analyze what is on the surface. They depend on personality, looks, history, and conduct. However, they're unable to distinguish spiritual rank since it needs depth that they have not gained. They regarded you as average. What they didn't realize was how many spiritual battles you had to fight simply to stand there in peace. They didn't witness the nights you fought in prayer or the defeats you faced without growing bitter. The purifying you underwent while no one was applauding. That's what earned you position, not titles, attractiveness, or charm, but pure obedience in secret. And since their spirits were not taught to see that they had viewed you as a danger rather than a teacher, they attempted to discredit you because they couldn't decipher you. They attempted to reduce you to what made sense in their narrow world. But in doing so, they exposed themselves, not you. They revealed their spiritual immaturity, unhealed hurts, and aversion to the truth. They were not prepared to encounter someone who didn't need to be liked, someone who wasn't a performer, Someone who had genuine power without requiring attention. They couldn't identify the general in front of them because their own soul hadn't made it through boot camp number 8. They learned the hard way that you don't need to compel others. You just have to withstand them. You did not raise your voice. You did not call them out. You did not collect receipts or plan retribution. You just survived. And for someone like you, survival was everything but passive. It was power in its most pure form. They expected you to collapse. They expected you to strike out, lose control, and become the antagonist. They kept painting you to be. Instead, you continued walking. You kept healing. You kept gleaming. And it is what is troubling them right now. They're recognizing you didn't need to curse them since your survival was a divine indictment. Existing in peace after all they hurled at you is much more devastating than any retort. It demonstrated that they had no real influence over you, that everything they tried, from gossip to manipulation to spiritual assaults, was ineffective against the protection of your life. And now, the stillness that they previously regarded for weakness is shouting at them louder than any accusation. The reality is, selected ones are protected in a manner that avoids revenge. The covering takes care of it. Your only task was to persevere. And now that you have it, the exposure happens automatically. The more people watch you succeed, the more their lives collapse. The more your peace extends, the more chaotic they get. They're dealing with guilt, paranoia, and spiritual repercussions. Not because you hex them, but because the truth has a frequency, and your life emits it every day. They believed they were testing your emotions, but they instead tested God's patience. And God doesn't have to create a fuss. He just waits for the fruit to speak. And yours is speaking loudly, without bitterness or malice. Simply quiet, clear proof that you were the one covered all along. They are not plagued by your remarks. They are tormented by your perseverance. Your survival prompted them to gaze in the mirror. For the first time, they were forced to confront a version of themselves who had no one else to blame. You didn't just endure them. You revealed them by simply refusing to be destroyed. Number 9, you aroused their judgment by carrying what they attempted to take spiritually. They were not seeking your individuality. They were not envious of your lifestyle. They genuinely desired your power. You carried authority in silence, the significance of your presence, how everything changed when you arrived. However, they did not want to go through what you did to bear it. They wanted the impact without the method, light, crushing, anointing, or altar. You did not suddenly wake up with this level of spirituality. You earned it in areas no one saw, through rejection, shame, obedience, solitude, and combat that almost killed you. You weren't only able to endure the storms, they molded you. The oil on your life was not given to you. It was forced out of you. So when they sought to copy you, taking your manner, language, and presence, they had no idea they were entering a domain they were unqualified for. They attempted to emulate the fruit without knowing the way. But heaven recognized the difference. Heaven understood the cost. And the moment they tried to spiritually hijack something that was never theirs. Judgment was invoked because the spirit world does not value ambition. It respects genuineness. Authenticity is shown via hardship. You paid in tears, in battle, in obedience when your whole being wanted to give up. This is why your oil is safeguarded. They triggered judgment not because you requested it, but because the order of heaven requires balance. When someone attempts to spiritually impersonate rank, they're not punished by their trespass in a domain that responds to unauthorized entrance. That's why their plans fell through. That is why they are fighting monsters they cannot overcome. That is why doors are shutting and peace is leaving because they touched what was holy but not sanctified. They envied neither luck nor charisma. It was wonderful weight, and you don't get it by copying. You obtain it by dying. to myself again and over again. They attempted to dethrone someone who was not even on a throne. You were on assignment, and in their attempt to replace you, they did more than simply disgrace you. They insulted the one who anointed you. That is not simply petty. That is spiritual perjury. Heaven answered appropriately. Number 10, you did not arrive with a crown. You arrived with an assignment. You didn't need a title, a spotlight, or permission to prove your purpose. You were not brought here to be revered. You were brought here to labor. You did not arrive wearing a crown. You arrived with an assignment. And this is why you were first undervalued. They couldn't see the value in the grind. They couldn't discern the hallowed in your quiet. You didn't seem like the kind of person who would have spiritual authority. But that's because true authority doesn't dress to impress. It moves in accordance. Spiritual rank is unrelated to how loud you are or how many people follow you. It's all about jurisdiction, divine clearing to restore order to spiritual turmoil. That's why some rooms felt unpleasant as soon as you came in. You didn't have to say anything. Your soul had weight, and it disturbed what was hidden in the shadows. People felt they didn't like you, but they were really responding to the change that occurred as a result of your presence. You have divine authority to alter atmospheres, not because you practiced it in public, but because you were crushed for it in private. That's why the environment bends around you. It is not your charm. This is your clearance. Heaven has granted your soul permission to perform in the same way that others do. When you show up, things are revealed. Patterns get disturbed. People get frustrated or inspired, but they cannot remain the same. They didn't fear you at first because you didn't provoke dread. You merely moved differently. You walked like someone who had gone through fire and did not smell like smoke. You talked authoritatively, not arrogantly. That puzzled them. They were accustomed to noisy leaders who lacked enthusiasm. But when they sensed the calm, order, and pull that's surrounding you, that's when they recognized they weren't dealing with an ordinary person. You were not simply another personality. You had a presence-based license enabled. You did not come to impress, but to reform. It was too late by the time they realized this. The atmosphere had already reacted. Number 11, they attempted to subdue someone who had previously battled with angels and survived. They attempted to play games with someone who had previously seen conflicts they could not even imagine surviving. They believed you were soft, easy to manipulate, and simple to conquer, but only because they couldn't imagine the spiritual battle you'd had to endure behind closed doors while they flaunted their egos in public. You were struggling with angels in the dark. You fought for your mind, soul, and survival. Not only did you survive, but you also emerged with scars and a plan. That is what made you dangerous. Your past is more important than your volume, prestige, or words. You've already battled demons, and they're still dancing. You have already revealed the falsehoods. They're still defending. You've gone through fire, made peace with agony, and bargained your existence with heaven on nights when no one saw you were bleeding. So when they assessed you, they weren't dealing with a newbie. They were going toe-to-toe with someone who had died and regenerated spiritually several times. They wanted to dominate someone who had previously completed the level they were stuck at. It wasn't a fair battle, not because you were superior, but because you were already polished. You were not just responding to their pettiness. You were being discerning. You didn't flinch when they became noisy since you'd been subjected to such deafening quiet that you may have gone insane. You didn't respond when they mistreated you because you'd seen what a true spiritual assault looks like, and their antics didn't pose a danger. They approached you as if they were mounting a ladder, but they were really entering a domain that their spirit was not licensed for. They believed they could play you, but heaven forbids games at the feet of a chosen one. You're not only experienced, you're anointed by perseverance. And when they provoked your spiritual heritage, they learned the hard way. You don't mess with someone who has been through the valley and returned with fire in their eyes. You were not fashioned by applause. You were formed by anguish. And it is the version of you they were never prepared to meet. Number 12. They labeled you arrogant. But what they sensed was authority. They did not label you arrogant because you boasted. They labeled you arrogant because you refused to shrink. You did not reduce the light to make them more comfortable. You did not second-guess yourself to appease their anxieties. You spoke clearly. You moved with assurance. And you went into places like you belonged there, even when you were the most misunderstood person in the room. That alone was enough to convince the uninitiated that you were too much. However, they were not responding to arrogance. They were responding to authority. Real spiritual power exudes a presence that cannot be faked, replicated, or created. It stems from alignment. It stems from sacrifice. And it is often misconstrued by individuals who continue to feel significant via performance and impressing others. When someone hasn't developed their own inner force, they see your groundedness as pride since they haven't experienced fullness. It reads like a threat. Your presence reminded them of what they were still avoiding in themselves. You were not attempting to compete, but you did ruin the environment. You were not aiming to dominate, but your very presence revealed their spiritual emptiness. That's the issue with selected ones. You do not even need to attempt to shine. You simply do. And this is an issue for those who have based their identity on the acceptance of others rather than God's. You did not walk with pride. You strolled into the task. You were not consumed with being correct. You were firmly anchored in reality. But they couldn't tell the difference since they never had to go through fire to prove their identities. They were given their egos. You needed to bury yours. So no, you were not arrogant. You were activated. You were certain you'd finished apologizing for being divinely crafted. And others who misunderstood and never responded to your tone. They were responding to your honesty. You did not insult them with what you said. You angered them because of who you are and what they understood they could never become until they were willing to let go of their own ego. Many of them still aren't. Number 13. They attempted to play chess with an entity that had previously seen the whole board. They truly thought they had you cornered. I thought they were sleek. I thought they were playing you like a pawn, moving silently, planning in the shadows, thinking you were new to the game. But they didn't comprehend that while they were attempting to play chess, you were already sitting at the table with the person who constructed the whole board. You were not responding. You were discerning. You didn't move out of fear. You moved with insight. And that foreknowledge was not based on human wisdom. It sprang from alignment, for being in touch with something far greater than their plans. You were not predicting your next move. You were listening for spiritual guidance. Because walking with the Creator of time is more than simply a game. You have transcended. They misinterpreted your calmness as perplexity. Your silence indicates a lack of knowledge. But you weren't perplexed. You were just 10 levels beyond their knowledge. You knew things you didn't say. You saw the betrayals before they occurred. You sensed the envy before it was spoken. You saw them dig trenches and didn't try to stop them since you knew they'd fall into the same trap they made. That's what occurs when you're not just protected. Do not worry if you've already notified your selected ones. You pivot because every time they attempted to shut in on you, heaven diverted the whole situation. What seemed to be lost was really a heavenly setup. Each betrayal became a bridge. Each sabotage attempt resulted in a miraculous enhancement. They believed they had you in checkmate. However, God had already turned the board and altered the rules without their knowing. They believed they were being strategic. However, when dealing with someone who has been anointed, tactics alone will not enough. You don't have to manipulate, overthink, or micromanage every aspect since your actions are predetermined. They proceed with calculating. You moved in covenant, which is why everything backfired. Not because you were smarter, but because you were authorized. They attempted to trap you in a game. They never had the authority to win. And now they are learning the hard way. They miscalculated the fact that you were never alone and were always 5 steps ahead. Number 14. They now dread you. Not because you are dangerous, but because you are divinely protected. They were not terrified of you at first. You seemed too calm, commonplace, and unconcerned. You did not arrive with a large throng. You did not brag about who you were. You were not attempting to prove anything. And that is precisely why they misunderstood you. They assumed this since they couldn't see your covering. It did not exist. They assumed no one was supporting you since you didn't fight back in a manner they expected. But when they tried you, everything changed, and not in their favor. Doors that had formerly flown open for them, now slamming shut. Strange patterns followed their footsteps. They promised they had hidden the secrets, surfaced without explanation. It was not you. It was what was behind you. The divine does not need to scream to be present. It just replies. And heaven answered, not because you sought vengeance, but because your soul was designated as precious. They unknowingly touched something sacred. Now they do. They're not just terrified of you. They are terrified of what follows you, what protects you, what fights for you. They've seen enough to conclude that there is something about you that cannot be explained by reasoning. You aren't moving with force yet. When you move in, the resistance folds. You do not threaten anybody. People shiver after passing you. That is not intimidation. That is heavenly immunity. You are not dangerous in the worldly sense, but you are not to be trifled with in the spiritual one. They tried your patience, integrity, and quiet, and when none of it broke you, they concluded you were helpless. They failed to see that your quietness was not a sign of weakness. There was restraint. You were letting heaven handle things that your hands didn't need to touch. And now they're experiencing the consequences of attempting to condemn someone who had been miraculously cleansed. They've discovered that the most dangerous individual in the room isn't the most vocal. It is the one who is supported by worlds that they cannot perceive. You didn't have to raise a finger. You just had to keep in place because heaven took it personally when they came for you. And they're no longer merely avoiding confrontation. They are avoiding you, not out of fear, but because they realize you're not alone. Let this be apparent. They weren't ready for what? They woke up when they tried you. They evaluated the worship, but did not determine its rating. They misunderstood your humility for weakness and stillness for absence. However, what they touched was not simply a person. It was a realm, a kingdom defended by alignment, surrounded by heaven, and formed by conflicts they've never had to fight. They weren't playing chess with simply another person. They were up against someone who had previously struggled with demons, survived flames, and graduated from them. They wouldn't survive 5 minutes if every trap they laid became their instructor. Every phrase they condemned you with reverberated through their own lives. And what began as an assault evolved into an introduction to divine order. Ego did not ignite you. Rather, assignment did. You did not ask for this rank. You were prepared for it. Every betrayal, breakdown, and moment. You wanted to quit up, but did not. That was the price. And now that you walk with authority, everything around you bears witness. They don't fear your voice anymore. They are concerned about the subsequent quiet. They no longer acknowledge your existence. They are monitoring it not because you retaliated, but because heaven did. You weren't here to impress. You were assigned to a shift. And when they came for you, they were unprepared for the realm you brought with you. This is a confirmation. You're no longer the same person. You are not simply surviving. You're in control. And those who sought to minimize you now utter your name with care. Because when you're divine, leap backs down. You don't need vengeance. You become a revelation. If this spoke to you spiritually, make sure to like this video. Leave your ideas in the comments and share them with someone who needs this word. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, since this place is reserved for selected ones like you who have finished shrinking and are ready to walk. Heaven decreed. You are not only protected, but also posted, and your time has already started. If this message resonated with you, don't go without taking action. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. This is your haven for profound truth, spiritual clarity, and heavenly validation. Like the video to help spread the information to those who need it. Comment below with your views, testimony, or just a drop. If you experienced that transformation, please share it with someone who has been waging quiet wars, passing secret exams, and wielding invisible power. This is not simply material, it's confirmation. And this place was developed for select individuals like you. God bless you. Dear viewers, your support through Super Chat and membership is the only source of income that keeps this channel running. If you want me to continue uploading valuable content without delays and to stay motivated in providing you with the best wisdom, I need your help. Every contribution, big or small, makes a huge difference. Feel free to donate and support Pure Wisdom so we can keep growing together. Your generosity keeps this journey alive.
If you're enjoying the content on Pure Wisdom and find value in the messages we share, I encourage you to subscribe. Based on the latest analytics, 93.9% of viewers are watching without subscribing. By subscribing, you not only stay updated with new content, but also support the channel's growth, allowing us to continue spreading wisdom for the chosen ones. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an important message. Let's build this community together.